Hey, it's Ray with Sober Without God. I'm glad you're here today. Today, we're going to talk about triggers of religious trauma. On this channel, we talk about deconversion. We also talk about sobriety. Well, today, we are going to spend our time talking about some triggers of religious trauma. And I want to let you know that I am not a religious trauma expert. I just talk about things that I have experienced personally, and that if you need help with religious trauma, please talk to your primary care physician, or you can always visit recoveringfromreligion.org. They have a lot of people there who can chat with you online, or they can talk to you on the phone, but they will take good care of you. That's always a good place to start. But religious trauma is defined, I found a good definition. It's a set of symptoms experienced by those who have participated in or left behind authoritarian, dogmatic, and controlling religious groups and belief systems. So, for instance, for me, I was raised in a very fundamentalist Southern Baptist home, uh, and youth group and Sunday school and church were a big part of my life. And I grew up thinking that there was a deity out there who could read my thoughts and my mind. And I was punished by my parents if I didn't follow a certain set of rules and dogma. And it was just guilt and shame were always on my mind. And I've had people say to me, well, that's not the God of the Bible. Well, that's the God of the Bible that I was presented. I was also presented a God a Christ, who is very full of grace, and he would come in and rescue, and he would fill you with love and grace. And I felt that part of it too, very much so. But I also, when they set you up with these gospel tracks, here's one right here that I've got. When they set you up with these gospel tracks, they set you up for it. I mean, God rules. We sinned. The we sinned part was big for me, and I felt a lot of shame about the things I had done, or the things I was thinking, or the things that were in my mind. And of course, God provided. Jesus gives. Those parts. There is grace available to you, but people experience religious trauma over a lot of different things. There are people in the LGBTQ community who have been shunned because of who they have decided they are and who they are. There are people who've experienced religious trauma over sexual abuse. There are people who have experienced religious trauma for all kinds of reasons. And so I'm going to talk about a few triggers, things that trigger people to make them relive their experiences. So if you think this video might not be for you, then just leave. I'm not going to talk about them in depth, but these are some things that might come up that might remind you of the church you grew up in. And again, I'm not an expert on it. And it's hard. It's hard to find discussions online about religious trauma. I think we're still new in our understanding of what our upbringings did to us and how it affected our lives. In fact, a lot of the information I got was from people having open conversations online on Reddit or on Facebook, and people talking about the things that triggered them. So I took a few notes of people having conversations. And so the first thing I found that people said that really triggered them was hearing modern worship music. Modern worship music came on the scene. I remember when I was a young man, we would sing out a hymnal, and then they kind of started having modern worship come on the scene probably in the mid to late 80s, and then it blew up. Everybody had a worship praise band at the front, and now it is all that's going on. There are modern worship wars, as a matter of fact, and then people will dissect the theology of it. But if you're scanning through the radio dial and you have religious trauma and you were raised in a church that had that kind of music, and that song comes on that you heard, or you heard Oceans 1,000 times when you were growing up, it's going to get you, and it's going to remind you of things. And I would strongly suggest, the thing that has worked for me in my life, anytime a trigger hits me, is taking the time to get away from that trigger, taking time to breathe, taking time to focus on something else, taking time to do some mindfulness, taking time to call someone who is supportive in your life and say, hey, this just happened. Um, and I'm going through this right now. Um, Take time in your life to remove yourself from the situation. Take time to focus on you. Take time to relax and refocus. And then a trigger can take you back in time. It is a literal time machine. And don't let it take you back to that moment. Realize you are not in that moment. Mindfully remind yourself that you are in this present moment. So that's one. Another one is church talk. You see church talk all the time. If you ever spend any time on social media, thoughts and prayers, this is part of God's plan. If someone tells you, oh, you're going through a bad time, I'll pray for you. Or people talk about the end times, this is just a sign of the end times right now. Or this too shall pass, my grandma had a tumor and now the tumor's gone. It must be a miracle. All kinds of church talk. If you grew up in any kind of church at all, then you are extremely familiar with church talk. So church talk can also be a trigger, take you back to that time that you were in church, and it'll get to you. If you're anywhere in the Bible Belt or anywhere in the South, you are not going to escape people wanting to pray for you or God bless you. And that's something you're probably going to have to find a way to just nod your head and move on. Some people get very divisive and upset about it and will snap back. Before you get in that situation, decide how you're going to respond to it and move on from there. Another trigger is homophobic or anti-LGBTQ talk when it comes to, especially with religion. And, you may be in an area of the country where this doesn't happen in churches near you, and churches near you may be very accepting. But in the area where I live, it is not accepted in churches. And you may have been a victim of anti-LGBTQ talk, and you may have been rejected from a church because of who you are and because of your identity. And I'm sorry if that happened to you. And if you have had to endure that is a very difficult thing, especially having to hear it from a church. So once again, hopefully you have found part of a community. And that's one of the things I wanted to add in this. Finding community is vital. Finding people who are like you, finding people who will support you, finding an ally, finding people who will affirm you and love you for who you are is the most important thing. And it's hard if you are part of that community, and if you're in a church community and you thought the people in the church community were there to love you and accept you for who you are, and then suddenly you come out and they don't. That's devastating. And I'm sorry if that happened to you. But there are communities who will accept you, communities who will love you. I know that the atheist community in general is extremely accepting of the LGBTQ, of people who have come from the LGBTQ background. And if you are moving in that direction, there is an atheist community for you. And even if not, there are plenty of communities that are open to talk to you. Also, another trigger, guilt and shame. You may have picked up guilt and shame while you were in church. I know I did. I picked it up in my household as well as in church. Guilt and shame are two big triggers. And Brene Brown says one of the best ways to combat guilt and shame is through vulnerability and being vulnerable with people that you can trust. Show vulnerability to people you can trust, and those are ways you can do that. I strongly recommend researching Brene Brown. She has a great TED Talk. It's her most popular TED Talk. It's about vulnerability. Just type in Brene Brown, vulnerability. Take you right to it. I'll even leave a link below for you. But listen to her talk about vulnerability. But guilt and shame is a whole nother thing I've talked about on this channel several times before, with regards to alcohol and with religion. Another one is just church people in general. And most of them are well-meaning, and they want you to be with them in heaven forever. And with their motivation is right. And if they approach you and ask you and talk to you and hand you a gospel tract and approach you and say, this is the gospel, their motivation is correct, but their thinking is wrong. And it's okay just to say, I'm not interested. And if they continue to come after you, just firmly say no. Or if they knock on your door, or that Jehovah's Witness or that Mormon or that Southern Baptist or whoever comes to your door, it's okay not even to answer the door. Just those can be triggers as well. Just treat them like a solicitor. And if you want to engage them, be ready to answer questions and talk to them. But you don't have to engage them at all. But understand that is another trigger as well. And bad theology. Talking to people, having a conversation. If you do decide to engage people who are church people, understand there's going to be some bad theology out there. One Redditor I was reading, he said, this is the quote, that this is what he said. He said, the most offensive thing to me is the notion that God cares about where you put your car keys or where you will be able to buy a summer house, but he lets his children die in famine and wars. And that's a feeling that a lot of non-Christians have, a lot of people who've left religion have. There's a lot of idea about the problem of evil and the problem of pain. And that may be you still may be recovering from religious trauma and be dealing with a lot of these thoughts and ideas. But I encourage you, if you respond to any of these triggers, and there'll be more, if you have a religious trauma trigger that hits you different that I haven't mentioned, please leave it in the comment section below after you hit the like button. I would really appreciate it, and let me know. And we can talk about this some more on this channel. But finding a community of people, and that's one of the hardest things about leaving a church, is that lack of community. But there are plenty of communities online that you can get involved in, and hopefully you can find people close to you as well. And I hope this video helps you out a little bit, understanding trauma, understanding some of the triggers that are out there. And I'll see you next time on Sober Without God.